Every Tuesday, we take a look at some of the things happening in the world of politics. We do that with our Professor of Politics, Dr. Jim Joseph from the University of Newcastle. And Jim, lots to talk about at the moment, but a lot of people thinking, well, hang on, what about some of the travel bans that have just popped in at the moment? Of course, the one from India comes to mind, and this whole idea of citizenship, what does it actually mean anymore? Good morning.
Yeah, good morning, Mark. If you just think a minute, the government's implemented this ban, and for present purposes, we don't need to go into the whys or wherefores. But what it means is that Australian citizens who are in India are not able to return to Australia. And there, like I said, there may be good reasons for some form of freeze on travel. It's not consistent, though, with other decisions that the government has made. But it raises the issue, Mark, of what is it to be a citizen? What does it mean? I mean,
well, if you take out your passport, I mean, look, I'll just jump in straight away and say, look, with one little disclaimer around it, I'm personally not in favour of a ban that removes the rights of citizens to return back to Australia.
Well, it's interesting you should say that. The High Court, the Australia's High Court, in a judgment back in 1988, made a comment. It wasn't a ruling or a decision, although as a comment it refers to where it might have gone. The comment was that under law, or I think the phrase was under the law, citizens should not be barred by fiat or legislation from coming back to Australia.
Well, if you look at our passport on page 1, it basically says just that, obviously in a little bit more clever language, but it basically says that very thing.
However, in this particular case, there's no reference to the Constitution. When the High Court made that comment, there was no reference to any law in particular. So if it was not implied to the Constitution or whatever, and it was just simply to the concept of law, then we have the
almost a belief, really, like that we think this should happen, but if they haven't sort of stuck it to a particular law or whatever, then there's the non-binding bit.
Well, yeah, and under the Biosecurity Act, it overrides every law in the country. There is no law that is exempt or accepted in terms of the priority of the biosecurity law, except the Constitution. And if you have a look at the Constitution, there is no mention of citizenship at all. It's an interesting quirk.
It's almost probably not planned this way at the time, but it's almost a loophole. In fact, it is a loophole. Because we've seen the biosecurity stuff applied to just about every facet of our lives over the last year and a bit now. But like you said, this is an interesting little gap.
Well, it raises the question, of course, at the time of the Constitution being created and ratified and the creation of the Australian settler state, the nation state, citizenship was not part of the language because people understood themselves. Those who were alive, white people who were alive at the time, regarded themselves as British subjects. And up until the 1980s, we could be British subjects or Australian citizens, and we could have dual citizenship in a sense. So in 1901, the idea of writing in, citizens into the Constitution was just probably not really high on the priority. It didn't seem important. However, now, in the 21st century, the idea of the citizen and what are those citizens' rights, what are the entitlements, and what is the responsibility of a government to its citizens, those sorts of things are now open for question. We think of ourselves as citizens of Australia. If we're born in Australia, we are automatically citizens. In the common sense view, that is how we all think of it. However, in many respects, we are now finding that, yes, you can be a citizen, but hang on, we can prevent you from actually exercising that citizenship in certain circumstances. The question is, Australians overseas, if Australians travel overseas, are they opening themselves up to losing some of those citizenship entitlements? We can see what's happened with the current decision around travel from India, and we can see all sorts of health justifications for restricting travel. It's another matter, though, for the sorts of penalties and punishments that the government has in mind, that's an entirely separate thing, totally unrelated to health. It's a matter of political will and priority as to how they punish people who breach whatever regulation they put in place.
There is an interesting workaround for people who may be in India wanting to come home at the moment. And again, this is very easy to say because, if you've got the cash to do that, fine. I believe there are 21 countries that have travel bans on India at the moment, Australia being one. If you can get yourself to a country that doesn't have a ban with India for 2 weeks, you can then come back. But again, that's fine if you've got the cash to do that. Well, if you're not, you're kind of stuck.
Well, that sort of points to two different things, I think, Mark. The first is that, yes, if you find that loophole that can apply and you have the cash. And the second is if you have the cash, because people who are stranded overseas the citizens find themselves in a situation where they are dipping into savings and putting themselves in debt because they can't remove themselves from the country in which they're stranded. Okay, there's a 14-day leeway required if you happen to be in India, but in other countries they just simply can't get out. The question I guess we come back to is, what is the Australian government's responsibility to citizens, and how should our constitution reflect the fact that we are citizens and no longer British subjects? It's one of those many issues around an 1890s constitution that is not necessarily fit for purpose in the 21st century. There were various things that we could talk about there, but in particular the one that sort of exercises my mind this morning is that of citizenship and what it means to be a citizen in Australia in 2021.
Well, again, like you said, a document that's 130 plus years old, give or take. Things change, and there is a need to maybe have a look at that down the road. Some tough questions for those in that spot today. Our Professor of Politics, Jim Jost, always a pleasure, mate. We'll talk to you next Tuesday morning.
Yeah, my pleasure, Mark.
2NURFM, a broadcast service of the University of Newcastle.